Do you feel like the C-suite is at plateau on their knowledge with this AI transformation? Today's conversation is one every executive navigating AI, data, and decision making should be paying attention to. Bill Schmarzo is a globally recognized innovator, educator, and practitioner in big data, data science, and design thinking, and a veteran C-suite leader across top global organizations including Dell, Hitachi, and many more. Bill is widely known for helping organizations stop treating data as a cost and start treating it as an economic asset that drives real business outcomes. In this episode, we go beyond the technology to talk about leadership, AI literacy, decision-centric design, and what it really takes to turn data and AI into measurable value. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. Stay tuned. Let's welcome Bill Schmarzo. Bill Schmarzo, thank you. Thank you for being on the show today and welcome.
Thanks, Nav. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation. We've been circling this one for a while, so I'm eager to dive in and see what kind of questions you've got.
I want to open up with data, AI transformation, and the real business outcome that businesses are feeling like these days. Based on a study, 85% of AI initiatives are failing, these days. And the reason being is not technology, Majority of those are because of leadership and alignment gap. On the other side, 79% of CMOs are struggling to justify ROI on their digital investments. So there is a huge gap of investments. The huge dollar amount is being spent on tech infrastructure, marketing campaigns, and things like that. But still, where the outcome is aligned to that is tough. Where do you see with all these investments, failures, the gap to measure and even show the real value in the business success? Where do you see all this happening?
The fact that companies have invested so heavily in the technology is actually probably the right place to start. Let me say that with a caveat, right? Because I think you need to understand what this technology can do. And you got to be honest, I don't think many organizations really have exploited or understood the full potential of what AI can do for them. They're still thinking about it like as a productivity tool. It's the new spreadsheet. It's a new word processor, and they're missing the bigger thing. So I do think getting your hands dirty with the technology and learning kind of what you can do with it is there's a series of aha moments as you start working with the technology. So that's good. Where organizations are failing though is that it's not necessarily a smooth path from the technology to value. It's climbing
Yeah.
up this technology ladder, hoping that you find value, and hope is only a strategy in the cosmetics industry, right? And so once organizations, they got to kind of have a feel for this technology and what you can do with it and the full potential, they almost need to back up and say, okay, let's reset. Now that we know what we can do with this stuff, what's important to us from a business and operational perspective? How do we create value for our stakeholders, our constituents, our employees, our customers, right? How they need to get into a very deep conversation around how their organization creates and defines value creation effectiveness. And that's where it falls apart because value is not determined by the corporation. Value is determined by your customers and your
Absolutely.
constituents, right?
Yeah.
And so there's the technology, I think, seduces us into thinking that we don't have to worry about people. We just can play with technology, especially with Gen AI, you can crank out all kinds of answers. Some of them actually are accurate. Is that we miss the more important thing, which is you have to get into understanding who your stakeholders are, who your constituents are, how do they define value, what are the decisions they're trying to make, what are the KPIs and metrics around which they're going to measure success, and then figuring out how as an organization do I capture my unfair share of their value. That's the conversation that gets left behind. And so we skip that value conversation at the very front. We just kind of jump right into the technology because we've been playing with it, kind of feel comfortable with it, but we don't frame it around, do we understand as an organization how we create value? And so not to go off on a real blither here, but whether it's AI or any technology, organizations do a horrible job of understanding throughout the top to the bottom of the organization how the different parts of the organization actually create value for the organization and how, especially at the front lines of customer engagement and operational execution, because that is where value is created.
Do you think it's a siloed environment and culture?
Not only is it siloed, but it's layered. And you have senior executives who really are out of touch with what happens at the front lines of the organization. They're 2, 3, 4 levels removed from the people at the front line of customer engagement, of partner development, of operational execution, right? They're so far removed from that gap. So not only are you siloed, but you're layered, which creates this crisscross. And organizations don't know how do I drive alignment across an organization? Because if you don't have alignment, these AI models will only amplify the biases in the decisions you're making today. And so
Yes.
that's Nav, I think that's where it fails, is we don't take the time to back and say, let's bring all the key stakeholders together. Let's understand what their desired. Here's our business initiative. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, if this is what we're trying to accomplish, like we're trying to, improve customer excellence, customer retention, customer acquisition, right? Kind of things, right? Bring all the key stakeholders into the room, both from a domain silo perspective, but also from a layer perspective, and start talking about what are our desired outcomes? What are our benefits? What are our impediments? What are our ramifications of failing? What are the unintended consequences? And what are the measures, the KPIs and metrics around which you're going to measure our effectiveness? That's a very human effort, which is why I believe design thinking is as important as AI in really driving value from these AI investments.
You mentioned about like these days, some of leaders are also still in the mindset like AI is just a tool. It's just a new spreadsheet, right? I agree with you, huge and a big time, because if AI just exposes what you already have and do it at scale. If organization is dysfunctional without AI, it will just be dysfunctional at scale with it.
At scale dysfunctionality, not a good thing to have. Yes.
I would like to talk about your experience from top organizations like Dell, Hitachi, I mean, C-suite experience from those global organizations, and there are more to it, of course. Why those organizations are so slow to break all these silos and data issues and infrastructure related concerns? I mean, while new startups are changing the industry and setting up new trends and creating new categories, it's easier for those larger organizations to solve, but they take longer to solve all that.
It's almost harder for the big organizations. My experience has been the medium-sized organizations have a huge advantage because they can run fast. They can bring people together. They can create or sometimes already have a culture of collaboration and ideation. To me, the small, medium-sized organization, which is, by the way, why I see startups having such a huge impact, because they can create a culture. They're not having to carry the legacy of the culture like an albatross around their shoulders, right? And so when you can create that culture that really seeks to empower everybody in the organization to ideate and figure out where this goes, those people have a huge advantage over the large organizations. And you said it, right? The silos and the layers get in the way. The C-suite knows what's best, right? They already know the answer. And so this is why I think you see this huge disconnect, and why you see, I think you mentioned these stats that like 85 or 90%, 5% of all AI projects are failing to deliver value because they treat it like it's a spreadsheet, like a productivity tool. I mean, how many times you hear people talking about productivity tools and what we're going to do with these productivity tools? We're going to save costs by laying people off. Oh my gosh, don't you realize that the most valuable asset your organization has is the domain and tribal knowledge buried in those people? That AI can actually amplify that to identify new revenue opportunities, to drive new efficiencies, to new creative ideas, right? They miss it because they think about it as a productivity tool. And I think the hyperscalers are part of the problem here because they're just trying to show you that, hey, throw Copilot or Chat GPT or Gemini in there and you can write better marketing collateral. You can write your letters faster. Well, who gives a shit? Right? What you want to do is, how am I using that to create a better customer experience? How am I doing that to create a more agile supply chain, right? They missed the bigger picture because they haven't backed them and said, wait a second, this AI is very different than your traditional productivity tool. AI has the ability to continuously learn and adapt. And if you train it and you integrate it with the people, I think AI in the middle, not humans working for AI, but AI in the middle guiding them, AI becomes this talent amplifier that it turns every one of your sales reps into your best sales reps, every one of your nurses into your best nurses, turns every one of your basketball players into the best basketball player. So they missed They they fundamentally have the wrong frame. And I like to say, if you want to change the game, change the frame. And instead of thinking about AI as a productivity tool to optimize processes, flip it and say AI is a guide that can amplify the domain expertise and effectiveness of my employees to find new revenue opportunities.
Yeah, there is always a thing like garbage in, garbage out with AI. If you feed wrong prompt, wrong data, inconsistent information, it will just rely on that as truth and give you output based on that. And you coming from big data world, and I saw your work on big data a lot. What do you think? Like, there are structured data, there are unstructured data, and there's a huge data requirement. And large organizations may have leverage to provide AI that level of data that they can make decisions faster, better, quicker. How can this data situation be helpful for creating solutions or creating confusion at the same time with AI? What do you think about data requirement?
Good question. Tough one to ask, wasn't it? It's hard to articulate exactly what the challenge is. And I'm going to start off by saying that the challenge number one is don't start with your data. Don't start with your data. And being a data guy myself, I love getting my hands with the data and start playing with it and see what I can find in the data. The problem is if you don't know what it is you're trying to accomplish, if you don't know what's valuable to the organization, then it's hard to distinguish signal from noise in the data. I don't know what data is most valuable. I don't even know what data elements or even what data rows are most valuable if I don't know what value is. And so the challenge we've got, especially as data people, is that we want to jump right into the data. I had this very same conversation recently around causal AI. And the idea around causal AI is that we'll just grab the data and we'll start looking for trends and patterns. I said, no. What you need to do is you bring together your domain experts. Causal AI is trying to predict the causes of certain outcomes. Let's say that you're a hospital and you're trying to predict the cause of a fall. Let's say that your business initiative is to reduce hospital falls. Big issue, right? Costs you tens of millions of dollars every year in patients falling, lawsuits and injury, all kinds of things go bad. So reducing hospital falls is a really good initiative. Don't start with the data. Start with your domain experts. Ask them, what are the factors that usually contribute to a fall? And they'll tell you things like, well, their age, their mobility, the kind of sedations they're on, the lighting in the room. They'll give you 18, 20, 24 different variables that from their detailed experience, the nurses and the doctors who work with these people every day will tell you the 18 or 20 variables that most likely contribute to falls. Once I have that, I can start building a structured causal model. I can build my DAGs. And I can start using data to not only to validate that's true, those are the right ones, but also find that, hey, these are also ones that may be related to that are also important. But start with the humans. Start with understanding what the causal factors are, which means you need to understand what they're probably trying to solve, and let data help to validate, to strengthen, to imagine what else might be out there. So again, I think the challenge we as data people have, and I in particular have this as a big data person and a BI person before that, is I always wanted to start with the data. Let's build the dashboard. Let's build the analytic models. Let's do this without really stepping back and thinking, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What are our desired outcomes? How are we going to measure success? What's important to our stakeholders?
It's very interesting the way you explained, and I totally agree with that. Start with the end result first. Define your future state. All this situation with AI race, I call it a fear factor. Okay, so it's an acronym. Is what I call it as like F as FOMO. Okay, leaders are trying to solve problems they haven't
Right,
defined. Try,
right.
they're just trying to catch up. Okay, and then E as an education gap. Leaders don't have enough education or awareness about what AI can do and what it is built for and what are its limitations. A as an alignment gap. Exactly what you refer to, like start with your use case. Okay, the customer outcome, and then see, okay, what data can help to fill that and deliver it in the end. And R, which is roadmap, is not there. It's missing, right? So when FEAR blends together is when actually transformation becomes more meaningful.
That is really good because it does, I think, summarize the fear at the beginning forces people to act before they think. There's a rush to action. there's an education and awareness gap about what this technology can really do. Yeah, it can write better marketing collateral, but it can build simulations to help make trade-off decisions around some of our most difficult challenges. The alignment gap is what I see all the time. In fact, what I did at Dell adopted my thinking like a data science methodology, what I teach at the university. And the first two steps in that methodology is all around driving alignment, both silos and layers. How do you
Yeah.
break those apart? How do you mine that organizational tribal knowledge that you can use to train your AI models? It's a very useful way to think about it because we don't think about education up front on the full scope, and we certainly don't think about alignment. And as a result, we leave your example about 95% of companies are failing. Think how much money these companies are leaving on the table. Astronomical amounts of money because they haven't backed up, they haven't looked at fear and figured out, what I need to do.
Yeah, and also it's not just like the people who are actually on the floor working and implementing AI. And there is another study that says like organization emphasizing AI literacy at an executive level are projected to outperform peers financially. There is a huge advantage of awareness and education.
They don't sound like AI. They don't sound like neural networks and reinforcement learning models. Why am I spending time on education awareness and alignment? If we want to drive
Yeah.
value, then we need to start the conversation around value, and then let AI and all the marvelous AI tools available to us and data and all the unbelievable data we can have or we do have or could have help us to achieve that.
What is your take on agentic AI? A lot of automation is happening, workflows, processes, and even like decisions making are starting to get done by agentic AI. I wouldn't say a lot, but it started to happen already. I have seen Salesforce have cut down their customer support staff from 9,000 to 5,000 in the last year and replaced that with agents, like agentic AI. Okay, and resolving tickets faster than ever. And then another organization, Spotify, I heard the news is like they kind of screen the new headcount before opening on the public forum is like if that role can be done by AI or not. If the answer is yes, they don't open the role for humans. Where do you see this is going, and how agentic AI is being reliable? You coming from data, that's the ideal question I think of asking you is like again, it depends a lot on data accuracy.
We know that if we make decisions based on correlations, and correlations are basically averages, if you make decisions based on averages, at best, you're going to get average results. And part of the problem with agentic AI built on top of generative AI is that generative AI is an averaging tool, right? Looks at past trends, patterns, and relationships, averages across those, even the biases and accuracies there, and projects those forward. To me, that where a lot of this conversation starts to transform, especially around agentic AI, is when we start weaving causal AI into this thing. So we understand cause and effect. And we also start weaving in what I would call entity propensity models. So you've got a deep digital profile or digital twin of me as a customer. So if I'm on some website trying to plan a trip, it should know, right? It should know a lot about me as a traveler, how tall I am, how I like to travel, my preferences for connecting and not connecting, and et cetera, right? And it should use causal factors to figure out what are the right recommendations, right? And today we don't do that. It's a very lazy approach. Correlation is lazy analytics, right? You just average stuff, and we're seeing what happens, of course, in Gen AI from averaging, and then you average of averages and averages. You see this model collapse problem, right? I think the real key pivot point we're going to see here is that people want to understand the why an agentic AI has made a decision for them or a recommendation. What were the rationales? What were the factors? What were the weights, the priorities of those? So and we're going to see this already in some more like financial services and fair credit reporting, right? If I'm denied a loan, I have a right to know what the reasons were for why I was denied and the weights that they used, right? Did you weigh this higher than that? What were the priorities you put? So we're at kind of, I think, an inflection point where we've laid this foundation with a lot of these generative AI and agentic AI and large language models, and the ability to weave causal AI into that, to have the ability to do, you know, um, interventions, to do counterfactuals, to do what ifing. becomes so much more powerful if it's based on causal factors, not correlation factors.
I live with this day in, day out, so I kind of make sense. But how do you think it translates to leadership language? Because everyone in the C-suite wouldn't understand the way you described. Okay, you are coming from C-suite, but from data and technical background, right? And most leaders are not tech savvy. I mean, they're more profit and loss and like bottom line, top line oriented, and see on dashboards only, which kind of makes sense to see the pattern of business growth or not. But the way you described on this situation, how does it become meaningful for the C-suite from your perspective?
The question that I would try to convey to non-data executives is how important is it to understand why AI made that decision? How important is it, right? In some cases, it may not be important, and we can get into the cost of false positives and false negatives and things like that. But the real question is, how important is it to know why it made that decision? And then how important is it to be able to manipulate those why factors to try to drive a better outcome? So if the model in order for the model to understand why it made those decisions and the weights and variables that define that, we'll leave that to later. But if it understands the why, now you have, as a user, I have transparency into how the model works, and I have a level of building trust. Right now, it's a black box. I get an answer, I'm not sure, why you gave me an answer. In fact, Gen AI tool, I asked the same question 3 times, I get 3 different answers. And if I ask it why it gave me that, it gives me all kinds of wacky crap, right? And I do think as a customer, as a user, I would like to understand sometimes the why, and not all decisions require why, right? When I was at Yahoo, if you preferred the pink button over the blue button, you were going to get pink button. I didn't care why, right? Because the cost of being wrong, of serving you up the wrong, the wrong ad, for example, was a fraction of a penny. If I'm in a healthcare organization, if I'm in a financial services organization, if I'm in a manufacturing plant, understanding why becomes really important. Why did this particular part not work? What was wrong with the machine that was producing that? I need to understand why, because if I don't understand why, then I can't take the actions to fix it. So I think that is I gave a really long answer, but it really boils down to, if understanding why is important, then we have to focus on causal.
Do you feel like the C-suite is at plateau on their knowledge with this AI transformation?
Well, you raised this question of awareness and education early up, and I don't think we're there yet. You actually had a great stat about it. That basically, I think most of the C-suite doesn't fully understand the realm of what's going on with AI, both the potential of what it could do, right? There's still this infatuation with using it as a productivity tool. I'm going to replace all my software programmers with AI code generators, and they'll do about 80% of the work right, and the rest of the 20% they'll be wrong, and you're going to be screwed. You're going to have products not work, right? So the there's an education and awareness problem where we've really failed on, and part of it is on the vendors. Vendors are so eager to get you to buy something. They're
Yeah.
not taking the time to tell you exactly, here's what you could do. And to walk them through a process that, okay, if this is what's important to you, if this is what you're trying to accomplish, if these are your stakeholder desired outcomes, here's how AI, in the full range of AI, how you use predictive to identify trends and patterns, how you use causal to quantify cause and effect, how I use reinforcement learning to create, learning processes, how I use neural networks to make trade-off decisions, right? How do all these different tools play together? It isn't just one tool, right? Gen AI provides contextual awareness, which is great when I merge it with those other 4 technologies.
I agree with you. Vendors are so pushy to purchase their service or product. And I also have experienced is the situation like where vendors come in and they start to identify and propagate more problems to upsell and cross sell.
Right.
Okay. I mean, again, that's like an endless game. It never stops. We always are trying to catch up, solve existing problems. But if these situation can be controlled at a top level, like when those vendors are being authorized to get in and work.
Deep domain expertise into the C-suite, um, especially on an as-needed basis. They were seeing more and more universities bringing in outsiders, professionals like me being a teacher, right? because I bring 40 years of data and analytics experience. I use books in my class, but the books are literally being updated almost every day, right? I write blogs to expand, like I'm writing an addendum to my new book, The AI Human Edge, has a whole chapter dedicated to causal AI, because I think causal AI is one of the key factors. Well, so much has happened in the last 2 months since I finished the book that I'm gonna have to write an addendum to say, here's more content about causal AI. And so I think as a business executive, I understand the need to continuously learn and update your stuff. And that runs really counter to the way that faculty in most universities used to run, as you wrote a book, and for the next 20 years, you just taught from that book and life was good. And now we're in an environment, I mean, every week I'm having to update my material because the world is changing and I want my students to be successful. My success in the classroom is entirely dependent upon their success outside of the classroom.
I want to learn more about that, like from your book, from your expertise. You wanna like give some background, why you thought about it, and like why you think it's valuable in today's time.
Be honest with you, it wasn't necessarily my observation as it was my friends John Thompson and Mark Strauss are the ones who really beat me upside the head on causal AI. And actually, I asked them to co-author my chapter 5 on causal AI because I was infatuated. The more I learned about it, the more I kept thinking. I write a lot about entity propensity models, which are basically digital twins of humans, right? We did that at Yahoo's 20 some years ago, right? And so I use it as a construct for all the work that I do. And when I use causal AI to propagate the propensity scores that sit inside that, now I can do 3 really important things, right? So causal AI gives me cause effect. Now I can do interventions, right? Which means I can do sort of figure out if I do this instead of that, what happens? I can do counterfactuals after an event has occurred. It's like, okay, what would happen if I had done this instead? And it allows me to do lots of what if scenario, and especially around unintended consequences. And so the causal AI stuff to me is, Mark and John really introduced me to it, really beat me upside the head with it. I've jumped in full boat with it because now the light bulb went off, right? The challenge for, I think, a lot of professionals, me in particular, is you glom onto a certain perspective of life. It becomes your gospel. And then somebody comes along and says, that's not the truth, and you have to let go and unlearn that and say, okay, if that's not the gospel, then what is? And so I'm on the causal AI journey and I've seen it work. I see what it can do. And it's a true game changer in the ability to not only understand why the AI model is making the decisions it's making, but again, this ability to do what if scenarioing. What if we try this instead? Going back to the hospital fall situation. What if I improve lighting? What if I, for example, install force plates on the floor so I can measure somebody's balance as they're walking? What if I do these things? And it tells me if you do this, this is the likely outcome at some confidence level, right? So it allows me to put AI to work for me because I can now start doing these scenario development and simulations and such. So it is, it's a monster. It's 500 pages. Chapter 5 is dedicated to causal AI, and again, there's an appendum coming out for it that I'll send out to folks. But it talks about these entity propensity models and how. So the premise of the book, the fundamental premise of the book, is different than most books because I don't believe that the biggest benefit we can get from AI is using it to optimize processes and try to throw people out of work. I think the power of AI is amplifying and elevating our professional expertise while unleashing our natural curiosity and imagination. It's about how do I take nurses and turn every nurse into my best nurse, the best nurse she can become. Now, they're all the same, right? I have some nurses who are good at doing certain things. I have certain nurses who are doing other things. How do I leverage and amplify what they're really good at and then match them in the right jobs, in the right situations, in the right patients so they can be the most effective? AI, by the way, especially generative AI, is great at that contextual matching process. I have a patient who comes in. She's just been diagnosed with cancer. It's a first diagnosis, first time she's had it, right? How do I find what's the right nurse, the right doctor, the right treatment in order to provide that patient not only the best care, but also the best potential outcome? AI in the middle. It drives that. It takes the models on the nurses I've got, the models on the doctors I got, the models on the treatments I have, matches it with the propensity model on the patient and figures out the right combination. It acts as that guide. And then as the process is going along, it's continuously learning and adapting what's working, what's not working, and why. So we can make those changes. So yeah, the book is heavy. I mean, it's 500 pages. If you don't like it, it's a good doorstop, and it'll take you a long time to read it. This is this is the problem when you self-publish. You just start realizing you got to talk about this. You got to have this. It's all important. Pull it all together.
No, I'm already seeing an alignment because coming from a customer enablement perspective, that what I do every all the time I work with, like in B2B, it's very important to understand like what business is uh, requiring right now at any given time, what accounts are looking for, their intent signal, at the same time what data we already have, and you mentioned propensity score, and based on all that, and causal scoring system that you are coming up with is something that I would like to learn from, because in marketing it's very important to show the right content to the right people at the right time, okay,
Yep.
which is very important, and I want to win on that.
Let me share with you some work I'm doing on right now, which I think is really interesting. So I got a client who read the book, is really bought into the idea. They are trying to figure out how do they transform their B2B sales organization. Now think about the traditional B2B sales organization. Sales reps are aligned by territory. You get a territory, and it's a generic demographic decision that doesn't take into very much consideration the skills of the sales rep or the needs of the customer. What if? What if your sales organization was a matching of a detailed understanding of what your salespeople are really good at, their strengths? Some are good in
Mhm.
prospecting situations, some are good in growth situations, some are good in customer. I mean, they all have different strengths. Your customers all have different needs. They're not all the same. Just because they're all located in Chicago doesn't mean they're all the same, right? Some of them are in growth mode, some of them are in trouble mode. And it's how do I match the right sales team, sales rep, sales executive, or sales engineer with the right customer so that customer has not only the right experience, but also has the right sort of value creation process for both parties. How do you create that win-win? And so they're thinking through about this is a total different way of how you reorganize your sales organization. It's not by territory. It's now this mapping of sales reps to customers based on what the sales rep does best and what the customer needs, and AI is in the middle helping to drive that match.
It's very interesting, right on the spot statement. Like I talk to sales reps all the time to understand like what their customers are looking for and what they feel they need, right? And most of the times I also hear back is like, oh, organization is giving us something to sell, okay, and then we have to sell it in order to make our incentives. On the other side, why not organization build something that we can sell, okay, because we know what the voice of customer is, what the problem statement is, and why don't we tell organizations to build that instead, whatever you think you want to sell.
And that's what AI does really well, right? Causal AI understands those causal factors that drive those relationships. And generative AI allows us in context to make sure you have the right kind of matches. And reinforcement learning makes certain that every time we have an engagement, we're learning from that. So these tools are really fabulous when you put them together like a sports team. But again, you don't want a team full of shortstops, right? You want a team that's got a pitcher, a catcher, a first baseman, and you want to put people in the positions so they can be most successful, which means you need to understand a lot, not only about where your salespeople are today, but what's their maximum potential? And AI can help them to reach that maximum potential, but it takes a entirely different mindset. And it never really boils down to this. If you don't believe that your employees are your most important assets, then you've already lost the AI game.
Hmm.
Think about it for a second, because this is what AI can do. It can amplify the expertise and domain knowledge of each and every one of your employees. It can accelerate their development, accelerate their growth. It can help them to unleash that curiosity, like you just talked about, where they're talking to a couple of customers and they see that both customers have the same kind of problem. And if we only had a product that did this, we could solve that problem and sell it to them, right? That creativity that it exists at the front lines of customer engagement that gets washed out because we don't think about humans, our employees, as our most important assets, and also as the vehicle, the mouthpiece from the customer back into how we're trying to drive, market dominance and growth across the organization by building the products that customers actually need in order for them to achieve value.
This is great, Bill. One last question I want to ask before we hang up is uh, you have very clear picture what happens inside C-suite from large organizations, global organizations, what they talk, what they expect, and what they equip their staff with. What is that one piece of advice that you want to give top leaders today in this changing world? What is that going to be so that they are equipped and successful with the AI transformation?
I'm going to steal your phrase, education. They need to be educated on what these technologies can really do. And I mean really educated. It's not a productivity tool. And if we treat it like a productivity tool, it's going to get, half hour in a boardroom discussion. We're talking about how do these tools, these generative AI, reinforcement learning, causal AI, all these tools play together to really amplify. So the one thing would be take the time to understand what the potential of these tools truly are, become aware, become educated on that, literacy. And then once you understand that, now these people in the C-suite, they're pretty smart, right? They know how to get shit done. They're pretty smart. If you could show them that, the light bulbs start to go off and they'll start saying things like, oh my gosh, I could reorganize my sales organization to better match. I could reorganize our customer service organization. I could totally re-engineer how we organize to create value from our customers and harvest and realize more of that value back to the organization. So education and awareness, it has to start there.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for your time today and great insight. I mean, I really enjoyed the conversation. Very high energy.
Thanks, Nav, very much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Same here. Bye. And that's a wrap on this episode. We hope you are walking away with at least one battle-tested strategy you can apply to your own digital journey today. This show is built for leaders like you who are tired of the fluff and ready for real solutions. If you found value in this discussion today, please subscribe to the channel and leave us a review. It helps us bring more world-class leaders to the table. Also, feel free to share this episode with a colleague who is navigating these same digital trenches. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.